The scene is precise. You have rehearsed it many times. The person who turned you away, or the institution that passed you over, or the group that quietly closed its door, they return, and what they say is exactly this: we were wrong. The scene almost always ends there. The apology lands, the verdict is reversed, and the fantasy dissolves before any ordinary Tuesday follows. Introduction. There is a difference between wanting someone back and wanting a decision reversed. Both feel like longing. Both produce the same restlessness in the chest, the same compulsion to check a phone or rehearse a speech. But they are not the same request. Wanting a person back is oriented toward a shared future. Wanting a verdict reversed is oriented toward a particular moment, the moment another party acknowledges they were wrong about you. This folio concerns the second request, which most people have never named directly, and which explains behavior that otherwise makes no sense. The reason the verdict lives longer than genuine desire is that it does not belong to the object. A person, a position, a friendship group, these can be replaced, outgrown, or relinquished. The meaning assigned to their rejection is harder to set down because it does not live in the other person's hands. It was made by you in the hours and days after the door closed, in the process of making sense of what had happened. That meaning attached to your identity rather than to the specific event. And identity does not move on simply because circumstances do. This volume will work through 4 questions. What was actually lost? What did the rejection come to mean? Where is that meaning still governing behavior? And what remains once the verdict's authority has been examined and reduced? The master question running beneath all 4 is this: are you reaching for something you genuinely want, or are you trying to force the party that rejected you to withdraw its judgment of your worth? Hold that question. It will not be answered all at once. Chapter 1. 2 losses inside 1 rejection. Every rejection involves something concrete that was removed from your life or withheld from it. A particular person with a particular history with you. A role in an organization that would have restructured your days, your income, your professional identity. A seat at a table where certain conversations happened. A family member's approval offered freely to others and consistently withheld from you. These are real. Their loss is not symbolic. Before anything else, it is worth naming precisely what was taken away. What the lost object actually offered not only in retrospect, matters here. It may have included companionship, financial stability, intellectual stimulation, sexual partnership, social standing, or simple daily ease. Many objects offer several things simultaneously, which is why their loss registers at multiple levels, and why the grief can seem disproportionate to an outside observer who only sees one dimension of what was gone. Beyond practical function, there was emotional attachment. This is distinct from practical benefit. Emotional attachment involves the particular quality of feeling safe with a specific person, or proud inside a specific institution, or seen within a specific community. These attachments form over time and cannot be simply redirected to equivalent objects. The loss of that particular quality of feeling is a legitimate cause of grief, and it is not the same as being unable to find comfort, recognition, or belonging elsewhere. The lost object also carried a future. Part of what was forfeited was an imagined trajectory. Shared plans, anticipated milestones, assumed continuity. When a long relationship ends, or a job offer is withdrawn, or a community expels someone, the projections built around that object also end. The future version of the self that lived inside those plans disappears alongside the present object. That is a compounded loss, and it deserves acknowledgement as such. Grief for all of this is not weakness or irrationality. Attachment is a feature of how humans invest in their circumstances, and the disruption of attachment produces real distress. There is nothing in this folio that requires the lost object to have been trivial, mistaken, or unworthy of mourning. The loss may have been objectively significant. The grief may be proportionate. At the same time, not everything remembered about the lost object will survive honest inspection. Grief tends to recruit favorable memories and compress unfavorable ones. The relationship may have contained sustained incompatibility, The position may have demanded continuous compromise of values. The group may have required performance of an identity that was never fully yours. These details do not erase the loss, but they prevent the lost object from becoming something it never fully was. What opens here beneath the first loss is a second one. It is quieter and more durable, and it does not reside in the other person, the institution, or the community at all. Rejection does not only remove an object. In the hours after it lands, most people begin to interpret it, and interpretation is where the second wound opens. The interpreting mind does not usually stop at the event. It asks what the event means, and the answer it tends to reach first is a statement about the person who was rejected, rather than about the specific situation that produced the outcome. An event and its interpretation are not the same thing. The event has fixed coordinates, a particular person or institution, a particular moment, a particular set of circumstances, a decision made with limited and partial information. The interpretation, however, can expand far beyond those coordinates. It can move from a specific outcome into a claim about a person's general worth, appeal, or capacity. It can convert a result into a definition. When rejection completes its transformation into interpretation, specific language tends to appear. The language is categorical and present tense. Not "they chose someone else, but I am not wanted." Not "the committee had different criteria, but I am insufficient." Not "the group had a particular internal culture, but I am replaceable." These formulations feel honest because they emerge from real emotional pain, but they are not descriptions of an event. They are sentences about identity, and they arrive quietly enough that their arrival often goes unnoticed. Once identity language is in place, the second loss expands beyond the original domain. A romantic rejection begins to feel like evidence of general unattractiveness. A professional rejection begins to contaminate confidence in unrelated competencies. A social exclusion begins to feel like proof of something wrong with the self that other groups will presumably also detect. The domain of the original decision broadens until the verdict seems less like one person's or institution's response and more like an observable fact about who you are. This expansion is where romantic and professional examples converge. A person turned away by a partner they loved deeply may begin avoiding unfamiliar social situations because the verdict feels portable. A person passed over for promotion may hesitate to apply elsewhere, interpreting the original decision as information about a ceiling that applies universally. In neither case did the original rejecter make such a comprehensive claim. The comprehensiveness was added afterward by a mind trying to extract a durable lesson from a painful event. The second loss does not automatically contain useless material. Some rejections carry valid information. A professional assessment may identify a specific skill gap. A partner may identify a genuine pattern of behavior that consistently caused harm. A community may identify a values misalignment that was real. Valid information can be extracted from the interpretation without accepting the entire identity sentence. The work is separating what the event can accurately teach from what the mind has added through generalization. What the two losses share is that both require attention, but they require different kinds. The first loss asks for grief. The second asks for examination. And when they are not separated, the second can begin to perform the work of the first, driving behavior not toward mourning and recovery, but toward litigation, which is the attempt to have another party withdraw the verdict by reversing the decision. One of the clearest signals that the second loss has taken over is that the object itself has quietly become less appealing, and yet the pursuit continues. The relationship, examined honestly, contained serious incompatibilities. The position, reviewed carefully, would have required sustained sacrifice of things now recognized as central. The community, reconsidered, may not have been particularly nourishing, but the behavior that resembles wanting it back has not stopped. What replaces genuine desire in these cases is continued checking, revisiting, and proving. The person monitors the former partner's social presence not to recover a connection, but to gather evidence about the decision. The rejected applicant researches the position obsessively, not because the role still fits, but because the rejection still stings. The excluded member watches the group's activities not to find a way back, but to calibrate whether the decision was fair. The content of the monitoring changes, the urgency does not. Inside the fantasy, the shape of what is wanted also shifts. Genuine reunion fantasies tend to continue into ordinary shared life, negotiated schedules, familiar difficulties, real conversation. But when the second loss has taken over, the fantasy concentrates on a narrower scene, the moment of admission. The former partner acknowledges the mistake. The selection committee reverses the decision publicly. The family member confesses that they were wrong. What comes after the admission is rarely developed, because what was wanted was the admission itself, not what follows from it. If you ask someone in this position what they would actually do in the week following the imagined return, the answer often becomes unclear or is framed in surprisingly vague terms. There may be a sense that things would just work out, without specific content for how the incompatibilities that preceded the rejection would now be resolved. The reversal is the complete fantasy. The returned object is, in practice, secondary. The next question is not whether this is normal, it is, but what it means about which problem is actually driving the distress. If the former partner returned tomorrow in the exact condition they left, including all the difficulties that made the relationship hard, would that be genuinely wanted? If the position were reinstated under its original terms, including the constraints that made it costly, would that still feel like resolution? If the honest answer to both is uncertain, the evidence suggests that what is being sought is not the object, but the revision of the story the object's departure created. When that clarification is not made, something specific happens to energy and time. The focus on reversal keeps the rejecting party in a position of central authority over the viewer's sense of worth, not because they have any legitimate claim to that position, but because they have not been removed from it. The longer they occupy that position, the more behavior is organized around their potential judgment, rather than around present choices and present values. This is the mechanism that the rest of this folio examines. It is not a moral failure or a psychological defect. It is the predictable result of a specific structure in which the second loss, the identity wound, has been allowed to govern behavior without being directly identified. Naming that structure precisely is the first step toward interrupting it. Chapter 2. How rejection becomes a verdict. The actual event has a limited and specific shape. A particular person, at a particular point in time, in a particular context, made a decision that did not include you. That is the full description. What the event contains is finite. What the interpretation may expand it into is not. The first interpretation usually arrives within hours. The mind asks what this means, and the answer it reaches tends to be contextual at first. Perhaps they had already decided, perhaps the timing was wrong, perhaps the criteria did not match the available strengths. These contextual readings are accurate as far as they go. The difficulty is that they rarely satisfy for long because they leave the outcome feeling arbitrary. And arbitrary outcomes are harder to accept than meaningful ones. The mind prefers a reason it can understand, and the most available reason tends to be personal. So the language shifts. Phrases that began as, "In this situation I was not chosen," gradually become, "I am not the kind of person who is chosen." The event transforms from a data point into a data set, and then into a pattern, and then into a fixed characteristic. This transformation often happens without conscious intention. It is a habit of sense-making rather than a deliberate self-accusation. What accelerates the process is the way memory reorganizes in the aftermath. Once an identity interpretation is in place, the mind begins retrieving earlier events that appear to confirm it. A previous relationship that ended becomes further evidence. A project that was not recognized becomes corroborating detail. A childhood moment of exclusion, previously dormant, returns as foundational proof. The current rejection is no longer a single event, but the most recent entry in a case file that the mind has been building, in some cases for years. Future expectations adjust accordingly. Applications are not submitted, conversations are not initiated. Risks that would ordinarily be reasonable are avoided because the identity sentence is now treated as forward-looking information. This is what happens to people like me. The verdict begins to govern behavior, not only in the domain where it originated, but in adjacent domains where the logic seems transferable. The distinction worth preserving here is between pattern recognition and identity sentencing. Looking honestly at repeated outcomes in a specific area with the intention of identifying something learnable is a different activity from declaring a global personal limitation on the basis of a specific painful event. One is a review, the other is a conviction. These two activities feel similar from the inside, which is part of what makes it difficult to notice when the review has become a sentencing. Where a rejection becomes a verdict depends in part on whose decision it was and what authority that person or institution had been given. Not every rejection carries the same weight, and the difference is not entirely about the objective significance of the object. Much of it concerns the authority assigned to the rejecting party before the rejection occurred. When that authority is high, the decision they make carries the force of a formal judgment rather than a personal preference or a situational outcome. Admiration, love, status, and the desire to belong all function as authority-granting mechanisms. A person who deeply admires a particular partner's intelligence or judgment will tend to receive that partner's negative assessment more as a verdict than as an opinion. A professional who has respected a selection committee's discernment will be more likely to treat their rejection as definitive rather than as one perspective. A family member whose approval was formative will continue to have that approval treated as more than one person's view, regardless of how many other relationships have since been established. Scarcity increases authority further. When only one person, one position, or one community seemed capable of providing something genuinely needed, a specific quality of intimacy, a particular professional recognition, a form of belonging unavailable elsewhere, their decision acquires outsized significance simply because alternatives seem structurally absent. The verdict feels final, in part because the rejecter feels irreplaceable. Authority is also sustained by incomplete information. The rejected person often cannot fully observe the criteria that governed the decision. The partner's internal reasoning remains opaque. The committee's deliberation is not disclosed. The family's inherited dynamics are not explained. In the absence of information, the imagination fills the gap with explanations, and those explanations tend to place the explanatory weight on the rejected person's characteristics rather than on the decision-maker's circumstances, biases, preferences, or limitations. Those limitations deserve naming. The person who declined a relationship may have been navigating fear, prior damage, incompatible priorities, or straightforward incompatibility of temperament and values, none of which constitute a definitive assessment of the person they turned away. The committee that passed over an application may have had internal politics, prior commitments, biased criteria, or simply a different vision for what the role required. The family member withholding approval may be operating from their own unexamined inheritance rather than from accurate perception of who their child has become. This is not to suggest that all rejection is inaccurate or unfair. Some of it carries genuine, useful information. A partner's assessment that a particular way of engaging consistently caused harm may be correct. A committee's observation that a specific competency was underdeveloped may be accurate. These elements deserve honest engagement, extracted from the broader identity sentence, and treated as learnable rather than as definitions. What they do not constitute, even when accurate, is a final and universal judgment. A specific limitation at a specific moment, identified by a specific person with their own partial information, does not settle the question of general worth. But when the rejecting party has been given the authority of a final arbiter, their specific assessment tends to be received as if it did. A rejection that occurs in private is painful. A rejection that occurs in front of others, or that must be explained to others afterward, carries an additional layer of injury that reshapes the pursuit in specific ways. When the outcome of a relationship, an application, a social situation, or a family decision is known to other people, the embarrassment of being rejected includes an audience. Friends who knew about the relationship witness its end and draw their own conclusions. Colleagues who were aware of the application learn that it was unsuccessful. Family members who observed the exclusion form opinions about what it means. The community of people who know what happened becomes part of the wound, whether or not they say anything directly. The imagination then does something particular. It extends the reversal fantasy outward to include the audience. What is imagined is not only the rejecting party admitting the error privately, it is the correction being visible. The former partner expresses regret in a setting where mutual acquaintances are present. The committee announces a reconsideration. The family member makes a public acknowledgement. The reversal becomes a social event because the original rejection also carried social meaning, and the injury requires a social repair. In these cases, reputation becomes a component of the pursuit. What is being sought is not only recovered relationship or recovered professional standing, but recovered standing in the eyes of people who witnessed the original outcome. This can sustain the reversal drive long after the object itself has lost its genuine appeal, because the reputational component is not satisfied by internal work. It requires an external correction that is visible to the same community that witnessed the original decision. The difficulty is that this imagined audience is often more attentive in the imagination than in reality. The people who knew about the rejection have largely moved on to the subsequent concerns of their own lives. The friends, colleagues, or family members who appeared to witness the outcome are not, for the most part, monitoring its resolution with the attention that seems evident from the inside. Their lives have continued. The rejected person situation is one item among many in their social awareness, not the central preoccupation it is for the person living it. This does not mean public reputation never carries legitimate stakes. There are situations, professional communities, family systems, close social networks, where how an outcome was received matters practically, and where restoring standing serves genuine rather than merely imagined purposes. The work here is to identify the difference between situations where reputation genuinely requires attention and situations where the imagined audience has been granted the size and sustained attention they do not actually possess. The deepest question the audience around the verdict raises is this: when the reversal fantasy is examined, who is it actually intended to convince? Sometimes the answer is the rejecting party, sometimes it is the imagined witnesses, and sometimes, beneath both of those, the answer is the viewer themselves, still unconvinced that they are enough without the verdict being revised by the party who issued it. Chapter 3. The Reversal Drive. The most culturally endorsed form of reversal behavior is improvement. A person is rejected and responds by building something: a career, a physical transformation, a visible achievement, a public presence that communicates success. From the outside, this looks straightforwardly productive. From the inside, it can be something more complicated. The useful diagnostic question is not whether improvement is occurring, but who must witness it for it to feel complete. Growth chosen for its own sake, because a skill matters, because health serves daily functioning, because a creative ambition has its own internal pull, survives the absence of a specific observer. It does not require a particular audience to feel meaningful. But improvement aimed at reversal carries within it an invisible requirement. The person who made the original decision must be aware of the result. This becomes audible in the way the achievement is imagined. The fantasy does not simply picture the outcome in its own context. It pictures the outcome being noticed by the rejecting party, the former partner glimpsing the changed life, the institution registering the subsequent success, the family observing the difference. When the fantasy of the achievement consistently runs through that specific observation, the improvement is serving a tribunal rather than a life. What happens to motivation when that observation is removed also reveals the structure. Imagine that the improvement will occur exactly as planned, but the rejecting party will never learn of it, will have no access to the result, and will form no opinion about the outcome. Does the goal retain its pull? If the answer is significantly less, this is useful information. It suggests that the motivation was partially or substantially organized around the imagined reversal rather than around the value of the outcome itself. This observation does not mean the rejecter should be informed or excluded by effort. It means that the person pursuing genuine development benefits from examining whether the improvement serves them when no one is scoring it. The goal may be entirely worth pursuing. The habits, the skills, the physical changes, the professional achievements, any of these can have lasting value entirely independent of what a former rejecter notices. But when the reversal remains central to the motivation, the rejecter retains authority over whether the growth feels successful. That authority is worth examining. The rejecting party's capacity to assess the result is limited by the same partial information, the same circumstances, and the same biases that shaped the original decision. A former partner's opinion of a subsequent achievement does not constitute an objective verdict on its value. A committee's awareness of a later success does not settle the question of whether the original assessment was accurate. The observer whose observation feels necessary is still the same person, with the same limited vantage point, that produced a decision now under sustained examination. The benefits of genuine development are real and worth pursuing for their own sake. Better health, stronger skills, more stable relationships, deeper competence, these serve the life being lived right now, not the tribunal of the past. When growth is redirected toward present function rather than past correction, its value becomes independent rather than contingent. Evaluation still requires witnesses, but the relevant witnesses change. The question shifts from whether the rejecting party would now assess things differently to whether the people currently present in the viewer's life, trusted, informed, and invested in the present rather than the corrected past, can see meaningful development. That shift in audience is also a shift in who holds authority over the verdict. Another message sent. Another application submitted to the same institution. Another attempt to create a circumstance in which renewed contact might occur and might produce a different outcome. The object is the same. The hope is the same. The result most of the time is also the same, but the attempt feels necessary in a way that is difficult to examine from inside the urgency. There is a meaningful distinction between reasonable follow-up and contact that has become something else. A single, calm, clearly stated expression of continued interest is not inherently problematic. A formal appeal within an established process is appropriate where one exists. A genuine question left unanswered by a previous conversation, asked once and without pressure, may represent legitimate, unfinished practical business. These are not the same as repeated attempts made after a clear refusal has been given. A clear refusal has a particular quality. It does not require decoding. It does not leave room for the interpretation that more persistence might produce a different response. When a clear refusal has been given and repeated contact continues regardless, the contact is no longer oriented toward a realistic outcome. It is organized around the internal need for the refusal to be revised, which is a different purpose. The second purpose does not justify the contact, and it should not be used to rationalize it. What pursuing produces in the absence of a clear response is brief hope. This is perhaps its most durable mechanism. Ambiguous responses, a message opened but not answered, an application acknowledged but not decided, a social interaction that was warm but led nowhere, can sustain the loop almost indefinitely. Ambiguity reads as possibility, and possibility reads as justification for continued contact. The mind interprets the absence of a definitive no as something resembling a conditional yes, and the loop restarts. The question worth asking about sustained pursuit is whether there is a practical closure need that genuinely requires resolution. Information about a shared asset, a formal decision that carries administrative consequence, a professional clarification with real downstream implications. These may justify a single, bounded, appropriately timed contact. They are different from repeated attempts to reopen emotional territory that has been clearly closed. Where pursuit feels genuinely unmanageable, where the urge to contact is persistent and distressing, where it is causing harm to the viewer or to the other party, where it is producing legal or practical risks, That is a situation that warrants support from a qualified professional rather than a framework from a self-examination folio. This chapter is not a substitute for that support. It is a tool for recognition, not for clinical intervention. The replacement is checked. The person chosen for the position is researched. The new member of the social group, the successor in the family's regard, the recipient of the opportunity originally sought, all of these become objects of sustained attention that functions as evidence gathering. What the monitoring is looking for is an explanation that resolves the identity question the rejection opened. If the replacement is clearly superior in obvious ways, the rejection can be explained without reference to general worth. If the replacement is not clearly superior, the rejection becomes harder to accept and the identity wound remains raw. Neither outcome actually restores jurisdiction. Neither outcome changes what the original decision meant or whether its interpretation was accurate. But the search for explanatory evidence continues regardless, because it feels like it might. The evidence gathered through monitoring tends to be selective. Information that confirms the replacement's advantages is catalogued carefully. Information that complicates the picture, that the new partner also struggles, that the selected candidate left after 6 months, that the favored family member is also navigating difficulties, is processed less thoroughly. The mind is not conducting an honest audit. It is conducting a case, and evidence is being selected to support the case currently in progress. Monitoring also produces a predictable emotional cycle. When the replacement appears to be struggling, there is brief relief. The decision looks worse and the verdict temporarily seems less definitive. When the replacement appears to be thriving, there is pain. The decision looks correct and the verdict tightens. Both states confirm that the monitoring is not genuinely gathering information. It is testing the validity of the original judgment about personal worth using the wrong instrument. More information about the replacement cannot restore the jurisdiction that was lost when the rejection was issued. The replacement's qualities say something about what the rejecting party chose and why, but they do not settle the question of what the rejected person's worth is in the domains of their own life. These are separate questions, and answering one does not answer the other. The monitoring is organized as if they were the same question, which is why it continues without producing resolution. Reducing monitoring, specifically limiting access to channels through which comparison is conducted, interrupts this cycle without requiring the underlying question to be fully answered first. This is a behavioral step rather than an emotional one, and it can be taken even when the urge to check remains strong. Where the monitoring has become persistent enough to interfere with daily function, or where it has taken forms that could cause harm to the viewer or the person being monitored, that is a situation in which professional support is appropriate and should be sought. Chapter 4. 4 Tribunals. Romantic rejection is perhaps the domain in which the object and the verdict become most thoroughly entangled, partly because romantic partnership typically involves the most intimate form of being witnessed, and partly because being turned away by a person who once chose you, or whom you deeply wanted to choose you, carries an implication about desirability that few other rejections can replicate. The first task is to ask, as honestly as possible, what is actually missed. Is it the particular person, their presence, the specific texture of their attention, the knowledge held about them that no other relationship yet contains? Or is it the feeling of being chosen, confirmed and wanted by someone whose selection felt meaningful? Both can be present simultaneously, but they point in different directions. Missing a person is a form of grief. Missing the feeling of validation from that specific source is the territory of the verdict. Reunion fantasies in the romantic domain follow a particular pattern when the second loss has taken over. The imagined scene concentrates on the partner's return rather than on the renewed relationship's daily reality. The partner expresses regret. The original assessment is revised. The relief in the fantasy is disproportionate to any practical benefit that the return would actually provide. Because the relief is not about restored companionship, it is about restored standing in the eyes of someone whose judgment was treated as final. Incompatibilities do not disappear during the reversal fantasy, but they are largely suspended. A return to honest examination of what made the relationship difficult, or what the genuine present-day differences in values, priorities, or temperament would produce, usually reveals that the imagined reunion does not resolve the original conditions. This does not mean the grief for what was genuinely good is wrong. It means the pursuit of reversal is a different activity from the grief. Where a clear refusal has been given, where someone has explicitly and unambiguously communicated that they do not want contact, that boundary deserves to be respected, regardless of what the identity wound requires. The urgency to be reassessed does not override the other party's right to decline. This is where the reversal drive can become genuinely harmful, and it is worth being direct about that. Romantic rejection can produce the sharpest humiliation when it occurs in contexts known to mutual acquaintances, when it involves comparison to a successor, or when the relationship was long and its end was public. Humiliation is a legitimate injury that deserves acknowledgement. Responding to humiliation through pursuit, proving, or monitoring is understandable as an impulse. What it reliably does not produce is relief. Genuine present desire, the honest answer to whether this specific person with their full actual characteristics is wanted in this specific life, is worth testing directly. The test is not emotional intensity, which is unreliable in the period immediately following rejection. The test is behavioral specificity. What daily life with this person would actually look like, including its costs, and whether that life is genuinely wanted. Professional and institutional rejection operates on a particular kind of authority because the structures involved, employers, schools, credentialing bodies, professional associations, award panels, are culturally positioned as official assessors of capacity and merit. Their decisions carry the implicit weight of an evaluation conducted by qualified parties using legitimate criteria, even when the actual process was far more limited, partial, and contingent than that framing suggests. When a job offer is withdrawn, a promotion is given to another candidate. A school declines an application, an award goes elsewhere, or a professional body does not extend membership. There may be genuine, actionable feedback available in the outcome. A skill gap identified by someone with relevant expertise is worth examining. A quality of application that a committee found insufficient can often be addressed with specific preparation. Extracting this information honestly is different from treating the entire decision as a verdict on professional worth. Much of what governs professional and institutional decisions is opaque and only partially related to the qualities of the person assessed. Internal politics, prior commitments, budget constraints, the particular composition of a selection committee at a particular moment, the relationship between an organization's current priorities and the candidate's particular strengths. These factors are real, influential, and largely invisible to the person whose application was reviewed. Treating an outcome as a comprehensive assessment of professional value, when the actual process was subject to this many contingent variables, assigns far more authority to the decision than its structure warrants. The reversal drive in professional contexts tends to manifest as achievement organized around proving the committee wrong, rather than developing genuine professional capability. The goal shifts from building competence to building a case. Applications are framed around the original rejection rather than around present strengths. Career decisions are made in reference to the organization that declined rather than in reference to the person's own values and current opportunities. The original rejecter remains the central authority, and the professional's development is structured around winning their eventual recognition. There is a meaningful distinction between continued skill development, which serves the professional regardless of where they apply it, and development organized around reversing a specific judgment. The first serves an expanding set of opportunities. The second serves a single audience that retains authority precisely because its opinion remains the primary metric of success. Formal appeal processes exist in many institutional contexts and represent a legitimate recourse where specific procedural or factual errors occurred. A formal appeal is not the same as repeated informal contact. Where a genuine procedural concern exists, pursuing it through established channels is appropriate. Where no such channel exists, or where the appeal has been completed and the outcome stands, The practical forward path lies in identifying alternative routes, different institutions, different roles, different communities, rather than in sustained investment in the original tribunal. Social and familial rejection occupies a particular place in the map of this folio because it often operates below the level of explicit events. A friendship group that gradually excludes. A community that shifts its warmth without formal announcement. A family system that extends recognition, approval, or belonging to some members and withholds it from others through patterns accumulated across decades. These rejections rarely come with stated criteria, which makes them both harder to contest and harder to extract learning from. Belonging is closely tied to identity in a way that professional status and even romantic connection are not always. The communities in which a person was raised, or in which they built their adult social world, shape the sense of who that person is at a level that precedes conscious examination. When belonging in such a community is removed or withheld, the injury does not stay within the social domain. It reaches into the interior question of whether the person is fundamentally acceptable. Not merely whether they are liked, but whether they are the kind of person who belongs anywhere. The behavior produced by this kind of rejection can take the form of sustained performance. A person excluded from a family system or a social group may spend years presenting a refined version of themselves, more successful, more agreeable, more consistent with what the group appeared to value, in the hope that the performance will finally produce acceptance. The performing self and the actual self diverge in ways that accumulate cost, and what is being sought through the performance is not genuine belonging, but the withdrawal of a social verdict. Reconciliation with family members or former friends is sometimes genuinely possible and genuinely worth pursuing when both parties have some interest in it and when the conditions that produce the original estrangement have meaningfully changed. But reconciliation is different from submission, from returning to conditions of exclusion and performing the required identity in exchange for conditional inclusion. Genuine reconciliation involves mutual recognition of what happened, which requires that both parties be willing to engage with it honestly. Where exclusion has been clearly communicated, where a community, family system or friendship group has made explicit that contact is unwanted, that boundary warrants respect regardless of what the rejected person needs in terms of resolution. The pain of familial rejection in particular can be profound and lasting, and it deserves serious support, including professional support rather than only a self-examination framework. A particular challenge in social and familial rejection is the role of inherited shame. Some people carry not only the rejection of the current group, but a prior conditioning, often from childhood, in which certain kinds of belonging were treated as unavailable based on characteristics that were never within their control. When this prior conditioning is present, adult rejections can activate it with an intensity that exceeds what the current situation alone would produce. This is a place where the distinction between the event and its identity interpretation becomes especially important. Building alternative belonging is not a simple prescription, but it is a real possibility. Communities aligned with present values, chosen relationships built through genuine mutual interest, professional environments that recognize actual current strengths. These can provide the sense of being acceptable and recognizable without requiring the original tribunal to revise its verdict. The difficulty is that new belonging can initially feel less legitimate than the recovered approval of the original group, because the original group carried the authority of early identity formation. That impression is worth examining rather than accepting as definitive. The final caution here is one that applies across all 4 tribunals, replacing one tribunal with another, leaving a rejecting community in search of a new community whose approval can restore the verdict produces a different setting for the same dynamic. The new community is given the same authority as the old one, and the viewer's sense of worth remains contingent on external assessment rather than grounded in self-directed evaluation. Chapter 5. When you may actually want it back. The verdict framework, if applied without care, creates its own distortion. Not every longing for a person, opportunity, or community is identity litigation. Some of it is genuine desire, oriented toward a real relationship, a role that fits current values, a form of belonging that actually serves present life. This folio is not an argument that wanting something back is always a sign of confusion. It is a tool for testing which kind of wanting is present. Genuine desire has a particular quality when examined. It concerns the object as it actually is, including its difficulties, rather than a perfected version accessible only after the rejection is reversed. A person who genuinely wants a particular relationship can describe what that relationship actually offers, what it costs, what would need to be different, and what their honest role in its previous difficulties was. The appeal survives the reintroduction of these details because it is not dependent on an idealized version for its substance. Removing the imagined audience from the picture is a useful diagnostic step. Suppose that no one who knew about the rejection would ever learn that the reconnection occurred. No mutual acquaintances would witness the reversal. No public restoration of reputation would occur. The return would be entirely private, and its meaning would be available only to the people directly involved. Does the desire remain at the same intensity? For genuine desire, the audience is not a primary component. For verdict desire, its removal significantly reduces the pull. Removing the fantasy of the apology or admission does the same work on a different dimension. Suppose the reconnection occurs without any acknowledgement of the original rejection. No one concedes that they were wrong, no formal revision of the decision is offered, and the relationship or role simply continues under new terms. Does the desire remain? If what was wanted was the admission, rather than the renewed object, the desire will diminish substantially when the admission is suspended from the fantasy. Genuine desire is also specific about what is wanted from the object in present terms. Not what the object represented before the rejection, not what it might become under improved conditions, but what the actual current relationship, role or community offers the actual current person, with their current values, obligations, and available capacity. This specificity matters because the person who was rejected and the person considering a return are not identical. Time and experience change both parties, and genuine desire accounts for that change. Mutual compatibility and the other party's consent are non-negotiable components of any evaluation of genuine desire. A relationship is not genuinely available unless both parties want it. A role is not genuinely available unless the institution is willing to offer it. A community's belonging is not genuinely available unless its members are willing to extend it. These are external conditions that exist independently of the quality of the viewer's desire, and they must be factored in before any action is considered. Alongside genuine desire, there are sometimes practical matters that genuinely remain unresolved and that justify a bounded, proportionate form of contact. These deserve distinction from the reversal drive, because conflating them leads either to unnecessary suppression of legitimate need or to using legitimate need as justification for behavior that serves a different purpose. Missing information that carries practical consequences is the clearest case. A relationship that ended may involve shared assets, ongoing practical arrangements, or questions with administrative or financial implications that were not resolved at the point of separation. A professional rejection may have left open a question about references, about the status of submitted work, or about a timeline that affects other decisions. These are not pretexts. They are real bounded needs that can be addressed through a single, specifically framed communication. Formal appeal processes, where they exist, represent a distinct category: an institutional decision, a school's admissions outcome, a professional body's assessment, a workplace grievance, may have specific channels for review that are designed precisely for cases where procedural fairness or factual accuracy is questioned. Using those channels appropriately, within their designed scope and timeline, is a legitimate exercise of available recourse. It is different from repeated informal attempts to reopen a decision through personal pressure. An apology the viewer genuinely owes is worth distinguishing from the apology they want to receive. A situation in which the viewer's behavior contributed to the outcome in ways that were harmful and that have since been honestly examined may warrant a genuine expression of accountability. This kind of contact, when it is honest and is not organized around reopening the relationship, but around genuine acknowledgement, is different in character from contact organized around the other party's recognition of their error. The distinction between requesting closure and demanding reversal is perhaps the most important line to hold in this subsection. Closure, when sought once through an appropriate channel with genuine willingness to accept that the other party may not respond, is sometimes genuinely helpful. A question asked once in the clear understanding that an answer is not owed and may not come is different from a series of attempts to extract a particular response. The first respects the other party's position. The second does not. A proportionate single contact made for a legitimate practical reason should be followed by genuine acceptance of the response, including the response of no response. Non-response is a response, and it is a clear one. A second attempt following non-response, unless a specific practical emergency creates genuine necessity, is no longer serving the stated practical purpose. It is serving the reversal drive. There are situations in which the conditions that shaped the original rejection have changed in observable and substantive ways, and in which revisiting a relationship, role, or community represents genuine discernment rather than verdict pursuit. These situations are real enough to deserve honest examination rather than dismissal. Objective change means something specific here, not changed feelings, which are real, but do not alter the conditions that produce the original decision. Not changed circumstances that affect only the viewer, while the other party's position remains the same. Objective change means that the factors on both sides, the viewer's circumstances and characteristics, and the other party's circumstances and criteria, have shifted enough that the original reasons for the rejection may no longer apply in the same way. Mutual interest must be present for reconsideration to be worth pursuing. A desire to return that is not matched by any signal of reciprocal interest from the other party remains primarily a request for reversal rather than a genuine exploration of changed conditions. The viewer's changed circumstances do not obligate the other party to reconsider. Their previous decision was made within a context that was real for them, and their current position deserves to be assessed as current rather than treated as a holdover that new evidence should dissolve. Reviewing the original reasons honestly means examining them with the same care applied to the changed circumstances. If the rejection was based on a specific incompatibility, the question is whether that specific incompatibility has actually changed, not whether it has been reframed, minimized, or suspended by the intensity of present desire. Incompatibilities that remain present will not become differently consequential simply because the desire to return is now more acute. Chemistry and longing are insufficient as the sole evidence that changed conditions warrant a return. The feeling of connection, of recognition, of wanting, these are real and they matter, but they were also present before the original rejection in most cases, and they were not sufficient to prevent it. Relying on them as the primary argument for reconsideration repeats the original error of treating emotional intensity as a measure of compatibility. When conditions have genuinely changed and mutual interest exists, the appropriate approach involves new terms rather than the restoration of the previous arrangement. A relationship revisited after significant change is not the same relationship that ended. A role revisited after meaningful development is not the same role that was declined. Building new terms acknowledges both the history and the change, rather than attempting to restore a specific configuration that was already tested and found insufficient. The right to decline again belongs equally to both parties in any of these scenarios. Genuine reconsideration includes the possibility that the other party reviews the changed circumstances and concludes that the original decision still stands. That conclusion must be accepted without converting it into further evidence for the identity verdict. Chapter 6. The Reversal Audit. Before anything in this audit can be productive, the object must be named accurately, not as it existed in its best moments, not as it might have become, but as it actually was, and as it would need to be if returned. This requires specificity. The person, the position, the community, or the relationship stated plainly, without the softening that nostalgia applies automatically. What the object actually offers in present terms is the first column of the audit. Not what it offered before the rejection, not what it might offer after an imagined transformation. What it offers now, based on what is actually known about it, which includes everything learned during the relationship or pursuit, including the parts that were difficult, costly, or incompatible with what is actually valued now. This column tends to be shorter than expected. The second column is the costs. Every object of genuine significance has them. A particular relationship requires particular accommodations. A particular role demands particular sacrifices. A particular community requires particular performances of identity. These costs were real before the rejection and are not removed by the reversal. Listing them is not pessimism. It is the beginning of an honest evaluation. Idealization can be tested by asking whether the memory of the object includes its difficulties in their actual proportion. A long relationship that ended after sustained incompatibility is not well described by its best month. A position that required values compromise is not well described by its most stimulating week. A community that offered belonging on condition of identity performance is not well described by its warmest moments. These fuller descriptions are not available through ordinary nostalgia, which edits aggressively. They require deliberate recall of what was actually present. Mutual consent is a requirement of the object's availability, not merely a courtesy. A relationship is not available simply because it is desired. A role is not available unless the institution is willing to create or extend it. A community is not available on terms the viewer sets unilaterally. The object, in order to be genuinely named as desired, must include an honest assessment of whether it is actually obtainable through legitimate means. Whether the object fits current values, not the values held when the relationship was formed or when the application was submitted, but the values operating in the current life, is the final question this subsection can honestly address. People change in ways that make previous objects less compatible, even when those objects carry significant emotional history. An object that no longer fits current values is one for which the grief is real but the pursuit is not serving present life. The second part of the audit is less familiar, more uncomfortable, and ultimately more significant for most people in the territory this folio covers. It begins with one sentence, completed honestly. Their rejection means I am. The word or phrase that follows this sentence is the verdict. It may arrive quickly or may require a few moments of stillness to surface. It is usually categorical and present tense, unwanted, insufficient, replaceable, not good enough, easy to leave. Not the kind of person who gets chosen. Whatever word fills the blank is the sentence that has been running beneath the behavior, organizing the monitoring, the proving, and the pursuing without being directly examined. The domain of the verdict matters because it determines how far the generalization has traveled. A verdict that stays within the domain of the original rejection, I was not the right fit for that specific role, is far less damaging than one that has crossed domains and now applies to professional confidence, intimate relationships, social ease, and self-presentation simultaneously. Identifying whether the verdict has remained domain-specific or has expanded is useful information about the scope of what is actually being carried. Global generalization can be identified by the presence of always and never language. If the interpretation of the rejection includes the word always or never, always overlooked, never enough, never the first choice, those markers confirm that a specific event has been converted into a universal claim. Universal claims of this kind are not produced by single events. They are assembled by a mind that has recruited multiple instances to support a predetermined conclusion. Examining whether the conclusion preceded the evidence rather than following from it is part of the audit. Evidence for the verdict and evidence against it can both be examined. Evidence for may be real, in which case it contains something learnable. Evidence against: the relationships in which the viewer was genuinely chosen, the roles in which contribution was recognized, the communities in which belonging was extended without performance, is typically available but tends to be discounted during the period of active identity litigation. Bringing it into the same field of attention as the supporting evidence changes the proportions of the case being made against the self. The authority assigned to the rejecter deserves its own line in the audit. Whatever authority was granted to them, because of love, admiration, status, the scarcity of what they offered, or the formative role the domain played in identity, that authority was assigned by the viewer. It can be reviewed. The rejecting party's actual capacity to assess the viewer's general worth, using the information available to them, within the circumstances that govern their decision, is far more limited than the authority they have been given would suggest. Rewriting the event in contextual language means replacing "they rejected me because I am insufficient" with the more accurate and more bounded description. A particular person or institution in a specific situation with limited information, applying their own criteria and constraints, made a specific decision. That decision says something about the conditions of the decision. It does not settle general questions. Where the verdict contains genuine, accurate, specific feedback, a real pattern of behavior, a real skill deficit, a real values misalignment, that element should be extracted from the identity sentence and treated as information rather than as conviction. What the feedback can offer is specific and learnable. What the verdict claims is permanent and comprehensive. These are not the same communication, even when they originate from the same event. The reversal has occurred. In the imagined scene, the person returned, the institution reconsidered, the family or group acknowledged the error, and the admission that was wanted has now been given. Sit with the scene for a moment, rather than allowing it to dissolve at its usual stopping point. Continue past the moment of admission. The following week is ordinary. The daily structure has resumed. The relationship is back in place, and with it, the particular qualities of that specific person. Not the person refined by the reversal fantasy, but the person with their actual characteristics, their actual priorities, and their actual capacity. The role has been restored with its original terms, which include the constraints that made it costly before. The community's inclusion has been reinstated, along with the particular culture that made belonging there conditional. What is actually wanted in this continued scene? Not in the moment of admission, but in the second week, the third, the month following. What conversation is happening? What problem is being negotiated? What has genuinely changed about the conditions that produced the original outcome? These questions are not rhetorical. They are the substance of the test. If the fantasy loses energy past the moment of reversal, if the subsequent weeks feel flat or unspecific or quietly difficult, that tells something important about what the fantasy was actually built around. A private question is worth completing here, written down or simply held with honest attention. If the rejection were reversed tomorrow, what would I actually want next? Not what would feel satisfying in the moment of vindication, but what genuinely desired life would look like in the weeks and months that follow. The answer to this question, when given honestly, often contains more information than months of monitoring and rehearsal. Once the fantasy has been continued and examined, the separation becomes possible. Object desire and verdict desire can be classified independently. The longing for the specific person, role or community, with their actual costs included, can be assessed on its own terms. The desire for the reversal of the identity sentence, for the specific party who issued the verdict to withdraw it, can be seen as what it is: a separate request aimed at a separate problem, requiring a different and internally directed response. What this classification makes visible is where action is actually serving the viewer's life and where it is serving the tribunal. Actions that serve genuine object desire, if the object remains genuinely desired after honest examination, can be pursued where the other party's consent allows it. Actions that serve verdict desire, proving, monitoring, rehearsing, pursuing beyond what the situation warrants, are better understood as requests made of the wrong authority. The rejecting party cannot grant the relief being sought because the verdict's power does not reside in their hands. It resides in the continued permission the viewer is giving it. Chapter 7. Withdrawing your worth from the tribunal. The reversal audit produced a verdict with a particular shape. Now the work is not to erase it, but to reduce its jurisdiction, to restore it to the bounded event it actually was, rather than allowing it to continue functioning as a comprehensive claim about general worth. Begin with what the rejecting party actually decided. Not what the interpretation expanded it into, but the precise scope of the decision they made. A partner chose to end the relationship. An institution declined the application. A group reduced its contact. A family member withheld a specific form of approval. The decision had specific coordinates. It was made by specific people at a specific point in time, in specific circumstances. The information available to the rejecting party at the moment of the decision was partial. A partner knows only what has been shared and what they have observed, which is necessarily incomplete. A selection committee reviews materials prepared specifically for assessment purposes, which represent a curated and bounded version of the actual person. A community observes behavior in particular contexts, which may not be representative of the full person's range. The decision was made with the information available. The information available was limited. The criteria applied to the decision were also specific to the rejecting party's context, values, priorities, and circumstances at that particular moment. A partner's criteria for relationship were shaped by their own history, their own unresolved material, and their own particular priorities, none of which constitute objective standards of human worth. An institution's criteria were shaped by its current needs, its internal culture, and the particulars of its current situation. These criteria are real, but they are not universal. Much of what the decision cannot speak to is also worth naming. A rejection cannot determine whether the viewer will build a meaningful relationship with someone whose particular qualities are a genuine complement. A professional rejection cannot determine whether a different institution with different criteria will recognize a genuine contribution. A social exclusion cannot determine whether communities organized around different values will offer a quality of belonging the original group was not structured to provide. These are the questions the verdict cannot answer. Compatibility, timing, and scarcity are powerful contextual factors that shaped many rejections without ever being named in the outcome. Two people who are genuinely decent may be genuinely incompatible. A well-qualified person may face a process in which only one position was available and 5 equally qualified candidates applied. A community's exclusion may say more about the community's current cultural moment than about the excluded person's permanent acceptability. These factors do not make the pain smaller, they make the verdict smaller. Where genuine, specific, valid feedback exists within the rejection, a real behavioral pattern, a real skill that was underdeveloped, a real values misalignment, that feedback can be extracted from the verdict and treated as learnable information. The learning is worth pursuing. The identity sentence is not. The loss was real. The specific person, relationship, opportunity, role, or form of belonging that was taken away or withheld, this deserves grief rather than litigation, and grief is different from the sustained attempt to have the verdict revised. What was lost in terms of the actual object, the particular presence, the practical daily reality, the texture of that specific relationship, is worth naming without immediately converting it into evidence for or against the verdict. The lost present is real. The lost partnership with all its actual character. The lost professional path and its specific opportunities. The lost community and the particular quality of recognition it offered. These losses have their own weight, independent of what they came to mean about identity. The lost imagined future also deserves acknowledgement in its own right. The trajectory of shared plans, of accumulated history, of assumed continuity into years not yet lived, this is a distinct form of loss. It is mourning a version of life that was real enough to be imagined in specific terms but will not occur. This mourning does not require that version to have been idealized. Even an honest, realistically imagined future is genuinely lost when the relationship or opportunity that would have produced it ends. The humiliation also deserves acknowledgement without being converted into litigation material, being turned away in a context where it is publicly known, or where the comparison to whoever was chosen is vivid, produces a real injury that is distinct from both the object loss and the identity verdict. The injury of humiliation is social, and it is real. Naming it directly, as a specific wound rather than as evidence of a permanent characteristic, allows it to be mourned rather than prosecuted. Continuing to construct arguments for reversal rehearsing what should have been said, preparing for an imagined future conversation in which the case is finally made successfully, cataloguing everything that supports the view that the decision was wrong, is not grief. It is litigation, and litigation does not resolve grief. It postpones it by keeping the case open and active, rather than allowing the loss to be final enough to mourn. Monitoring and rehearsal feed the same suspension. Every check of the replacement's circumstances, every revisit of the original conversation, every preparation of the perfected response, keeps the event fresh as an ongoing case rather than allowing it to become a closed historical event that carries its full weight but is no longer in progress. Reducing these behaviors creates the space in which grief can function. Where the grief or the behaviors accompanying it feel genuinely unmanageable, where they are significantly impairing daily function, where they are persistent over extended time without any change in intensity, or where they are producing urges that feel unsafe. Professional support is the appropriate resource, not only a self-examination folio. That support can provide what this framework cannot: sustained, qualified, individualized engagement with the specific weight of the specific loss. With the verdict contextualized and the grief given its own space, something becomes possible that was not available while the tribunal remained active as the primary organizing structure. Growth that serves the present life, rather than the historical case. Choosing a goal that does not pass through the imagined observation of the rejecting party requires deliberate attention, because the habit of imagining their witness can be persistent. The goal might be entirely unrelated to the domain of the rejection, a skill, a relationship, a creative pursuit, a professional direction in a different field, a form of physical capacity. Or it might be in the same domain, but oriented toward the viewer's own criteria, rather than toward the specific criteria that governed the original decision. What distinguishes it is that the measure of success is internal, rather than contingent on a specific party's revised assessment. Defining value by present life means establishing what matters based on what is actually being lived, the relationships currently in place, the work currently engaged in, the community currently building, the body currently inhabited, the values currently operating. These are not consolation prizes for the absence of the rejected object. They are the actual content of the present life, and they have their own standards of quality that are independent of any historical tribunal. Feedback remains genuinely useful when it comes from sources that are relevant, informed, and invested in the present rather than the corrected past. A trusted person with genuine knowledge of the current situation. A professional with appropriate expertise. A community where consistent participation has built real context. These sources can offer assessment that the rejecting party, whatever their original authority, is not positioned to provide with equivalent accuracy about the person's current life. Competence builds in the direction of practice, not in the direction of imagined recognition. Time spent genuinely developing a skill, deepening a relationship, contributing to a community or building professional capacity accumulates without requiring the original rejector's awareness. This is not a prohibition on sharing progress. It is an observation about where the value resides, in the competence itself, not in whether the specific party who once declined it eventually acknowledges it. Belonging builds through participation rather than through demonstrated acceptability. Communities where showing up consistently, contributing genuinely, and engaging with actual present members creates recognition over time are different from communities where belonging requires proving that the original exclusion was wrong. The first kind of belonging is built forward, the second is built backward, and it uses the present to argue about the past. Using success as revenge is worth naming as a specific pitfall because it preserves the tribunal under a different motivation. If the primary satisfaction of an achievement is imagined as the rejecting party's discomfort or revision of their assessment, the achievement is still organized around the original verdict. The rejector remains central. The growth, however real it is in practical terms, is still being performed for an audience of one. Eventually, and this is not a promise about timing, because the shift is not predictable, the rejector simply becomes less central, not because they are forgotten, not because the loss stops mattering, but because the present life has accumulated enough genuine content that the historical verdict occupies a smaller proportion of the available attention. This is not a result that can be manufactured. It is a consequence of sustained engagement with the actual current life, rather than with the historical tribunal. Final chapter. Life after the appeal. Withdrawal from the tribunal is not only an internal shift, it has behavioral dimensions, specific activities that have been sustaining the verdict's authority by keeping the rejecting party's current circumstances continuously visible and emotionally relevant. The first step is identifying the channels through which monitoring occurs. These are specific: a social profile checked on a particular frequency, a mutual connection consulted for information, a digital space where the replacement's presence is visible, a professional network that provides updates on the selected candidate's progress, a family channel through which the favored member's recognition is broadcast. The channels are concrete and they can be mapped. Removing unnecessary access to those channels is a practical action that does not require emotional readiness to precede it. This is worth stating directly. Waiting until the monitoring no longer feels compelling before limiting it reverses the causal relationship. The monitoring sustains the feeling. Limiting the monitoring changes the information environment, which over time changes the intensity of the feeling. The action can precede the emotional shift. Not all professional or practical contact with the rejecting party or related parties requires elimination. A former colleague with whom professional interaction continues, a family system within which limited functional contact is unavoidable, a community that overlaps with other domains of current life. These contexts require judgment rather than blanket severance. The question is whether the contact serves a present practical purpose or whether it is primarily an occasion for continued comparison and monitoring. Planning for the urge to check, rather than responding to it as it arises, reduces its power. An urge anticipated and prepared for is different from one that arrives unexpectedly and finds no resistance. Knowing in advance what to do when the urge appears, a specific alternative action, a specific person to contact, a specific engagement with the present life, is more effective than depending on willpower at the moment of greatest pull. Dramatic public gestures deserve specific mention because they can feel like closure while actually sustaining the tribunal. Announcements organized around the rejection. Public demonstrations of progress clearly aimed at the rejecting party's awareness. Shared content with the transparent purpose of being witnessed by the specific audience of the original verdict. These actions extend rather than close the case. Closure, when it is behavioral rather than performed, tends to be quiet. Where monitoring has reached the point of feeling genuinely uncontrollable. Where the urge to check overrides repeated intention to stop. Where it is affecting work, sleep, or other relationships. Where it is producing behaviors that might violate legal boundaries or the other party's clearly stated wishes. Professional support is the appropriate response. This is not a sign of unusual weakness. It is a recognition that the level of distress exceeds what a self-directed process can adequately address. The practical forward movement of this folio is not only about stopping certain behaviors, it is about making choices that proceed from present values and present circumstances, rather than from the continued need to demonstrate something to the party that issued the original verdict. A relationship, a goal, or a community chosen in this way begins with a different question. Not would this impress them, or would this demonstrate that their assessment was wrong, but does this fit what I actually value and what my current life can sustain? The question seems simple. In practice, returning to it consistently while the verdict remains active requires deliberate effort, because the habit of imagining the rejector's observation can insert itself into decision-making without announcing its presence. Stating present reasons for choices, reasons that hold up without reference to the historical rejection, is a clarifying exercise. A relationship chosen because of genuine compatibility, specific shared values, and honest mutual interest has different foundations than one chosen partly because of what it demonstrates to a previous judge. These foundations are not always visible at the outset, but they become distinguishable when examined directly. Removing imagined observation from the decision does not mean making choices in isolation from all feedback. Trusted current people in the viewer's life, friends with genuine knowledge, professional mentors with relevant expertise, partners with real investment in the present, represent appropriate feedback sources. Their perspective is grounded in actual current circumstances, rather than in the particular vantage point of the rejecting party. The distinction is between feedback that informs the present and feedback organized around revising the past. Practical risks belong in the picture. Any genuine new choice, a new relationship, a career direction, a community joined, a goal pursued, involves real possibility of difficulty, failure, or further rejection. Including these risks honestly does not mean treating them as prohibitions. It means making choices with accurate information, rather than with the inflated certainty that can accompany decisions partly motivated by revenge or vindication. Ordinary progress is worth naming as a legitimate pace. Recovery of dignity, establishment of new belonging, development of competence and construction of a life that does not pass through the original tribunal. These are not processes that happen quickly or dramatically. They happen incrementally through consistent engagement with the present. And the absence of dramatic moments of transformation is not evidence that the process is not occurring. Revenge motivation tends to return periodically, often triggered by encounters with information about the rejecting party, by new difficulties that revive the old wound, or by comparison that surfaces unexpectedly. Noticing it when it returns, recognizing its particular quality, the way it shifts the primary audience of a choice from present life to historical tribunal, is more useful than trying to eliminate it permanently. The noticing itself is the beginning of the redirection. The fantasy comes back. It does not require an invitation. It tends to arrive following a failure, a disappointment, a moment of loneliness, an encounter with the rejecting party's continued presence in shared spaces, or simply a stretch of ordinary difficulty in which the imagined alternative briefly feels more vivid than the current reality. When it returns, the first task is identifying the trigger rather than immediately engaging with the content of the fantasy. What just happened? Was there a new difficulty in the present life that made the imagined reversal feel temporarily more compelling? Was there new information about the rejecting party that reactivated the comparison? Was there a moment of loneliness in which the fantasy offered a particular quality of imagined resolution? The trigger is specific, and naming it reduces the fantasy's apparent authority. It is not a transmission of truth. It is a response to a current state. Once the trigger is identified, the separation practiced in the audit can be applied again. The object, the person, the position, the community, and the verdict can be named as distinct. The honest answer to what is presently wanted from the object, with its full reality included, can be stated. The identity sentence the verdict carries can be acknowledged without being accepted as currently operative. Both can be present without either requiring an immediate response. New litigation must be refused. The fantasy offers, along with its familiar comfort, an invitation to reopen the case, to begin again assembling evidence, rehearsing arguments, and preparing a response to the original decision. This is the invitation to decline, not because the loss was unimportant, not because the original verdict was necessarily accurate, but because the litigation does not produce what it promises, and because the tribunal cannot grant what the litigation seeks. Returning to current evidence, what is actually true about the present life, the present relationships, the present capacity, and the present choices, is the redirection, not a motivational substitution for the fantasy, but an honest accounting of what actually exists in the present that has value independent of the historical tribunal. The current evidence may be incomplete. The present life may have its own difficulties. These realities do not need to be minimized for the return to current evidence to be useful. One life-building action, taken in the period following the return of the fantasy, is more effective than extended internal deliberation about whether the fantasy's return means progress has been lost. It has not. The return of the fantasy is a feature of how the mind processes unresolved pain, not evidence of failure in the process being undertaken. A single concrete engagement with the present, a conversation, a piece of work, a physical activity, a contribution to a community, does more than reasoning with the fantasy does. Whether real conditions have changed is a question worth distinguishing carefully from whether the emotional intensity has changed. The fantasy returning does not mean conditions have changed in ways that warrant renewed pursuit. Genuine objective change, in the circumstances of both parties, not only in the intensity of longing, is a specific factual question that can be assessed separately from the emotional state produced by the fantasy's return. In the imagined scene, the person or institution returns once more, and the admission is given and the verdict is withdrawn. The scene has been examined now. The feeling is recognized, and the next question is already forming. Not the fantasy's next question, which is whether the reversal feels complete, but the present life's question. What does the actual current day require? Epilogue. The verdict loses its seal return to the scene that opened this folio. The rejecter has returned. The admission has been made. They were wrong. This is what they are saying. The words are exactly as they were rehearsed. The verdict in the imagined scene is formally reversed. Continue past the moment of reversal. The following week is not imagined in the abstract. The actual person has returned with their actual character, including the difficulties that were real before the decision and that have not been dissolved by the admission. The actual role has been reinstated with its actual terms, including the costs that made it difficult before. The actual community has extended its welcome again, and along with the welcome come the same conditions that made belonging conditional the last time. With honest attention on that continued scene, the question posed at the beginning of this volume can be answered more accurately than it could have been when the folio opened. After the apology, after the reversal, after the verdict has been formally withdrawn, what, if anything, is genuinely desired in what remains? The answer is yours alone, and it is worth knowing. The rejection happened. It belongs to the historical record of the viewer's life, and it will remain there. The folio does not propose to remove it. It cannot be revised, and the effort to have it revised by the party that issued it has not produced the relief it promised, because the relief was never truly in their hands to give. What can be changed is the jurisdiction the verdict holds over the present. A historical event can be acknowledged as real without being allowed to continue functioning as a current definition. A rejection from a particular person, institution, or community, made at a particular moment with particular information in particular circumstances, is a real thing that occurred. It is not a permanent assessment of general worth. These are different claims, and the first does not entail the second. The master loop opened at the beginning of this volume with a simple question. Are you trying to recover what you genuinely want, or are you trying to force the party that rejected you to withdraw their verdict? After the audit, after the grief, after the contextualization, the answer is now available. And wherever genuine desire for the actual object remains, it can be pursued through honest, proportionate, and consented means. Where the pursuit was serving the tribunal rather than the present life, that pursuit can now be redirected, not because the loss was unimportant, but because the present life is where the actual choices are made. Before closing this folio, one honest question. What is the strongest pull you are currently experiencing? Is it toward the person, their particular presence in the specific shape they actually have? Is it toward the opportunity, the role, the institution, the professional recognition in its concrete terms? Is it toward the belonging, the community, the family approval, the social standing as it actually operates? Or is it primarily toward the verdict, toward having that specific historical judgment revised by the specific party who issued it? The answer points toward the next piece of work this channel is building. There is a different tribunal that appears not in rejection but in consistency. In the question of what your reliability, your word, and your pattern of presence mean to the people who depend on them. When reputation is built not on a historical verdict but on a pattern of genuine action, the authority of any single external assessment begins to lose its claim. That is the territory of the reliability testament, and it continues where this folio now rests. The verdict seal remains scratched into the folio's page. It is readable. It happened, but it no longer closes what comes next.